At first light, I found my childhood bicycle leaning against a tree that hadn't been there yesterday, its bell still warm in air that should have been cold. I hadn't thought about the bike in 20 years. It had a crooked basket and a scar along the frame from where I'd wrecked it on the gravel road the summer my father taught me to write my name with a stick in creek mud. Yet there it was, spotless after a night of rain, tires unspotted, chain oiled, the rubber still smelling faintly of new. Behind it, a narrow path ran into the woods where only laurel thickets used to be. The leaves on that new path weren't damp, they were dry and clean, as if nothing had ever fallen on them. I was back in Appalachia to sell my father's cabin and settle what was left of his life. He'd gone missing the previous autumn, no notes, no goodbye, just an empty truck in the pullout and his boots lined up on the porch as if he'd stepped out for coffee. The sheriff called it an accident. The old people in town didn't call it anything. They kept their voices low and their stories shorter. Inside the cabin, I found a shoebox on the kitchen table with index cards in it. Each card had a rule in my father's blocky handwriting. If the woods return something you lost, do not take it back. If the forest goes quiet, put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and look down. Never walk a new path after sundown. I laughed out loud, because laughing is what you do when you have no idea what else to do. Then I picked up the bike and wheeled it inside. That afternoon I went into town. The diner was the same, right down to the coffee that tasted like a burnt pot. The waitress glanced at the grime on my hands and the empty line where my father's ring used to sit. "You found your way back," she said. It wasn't a question. I told her there's a new trail behind the cabin. Her smile froze. "That's the woods making you a gift," she said. "Don't say thank you." I asked what she meant, but she only slid the check toward me and changed the subject to weather. In that town, weather was always safer than truth. At dusk, the birds stopped. It happened in a minute. One moment there were wrens and crows arguing for the last light. The next there was nothing but the rustle of my own breath. The silence in those woods didn't feel empty. It felt held. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth without thinking, just like the cards said, and kept my eyes on the dirt until the sound returned, like someone turning a radio back on. I found the stump on the third day. It was an old cedar, hollowed out by time, its center worn smooth the way stone wears smooth from water. A coil of frayed audio cable lay coiled beside it, like a sleeping snake. In the hollow were cassette tapes with handwritten labels, June 12th, Autumn Equinox, Caldwell 1978. I sat on the moss and listened to one through the portable player I found in the box. The tape was full of stories told in voices that didn't belong to any one person. It wasn't a choir, it was a handoff, a campfire ghost tale sliding from one mouth to the next, each ending with a breath drawn in the same place. Underneath it all was a low, steady sound, like wind finding a crack in a window. When I told the sheriff about the stump, his jaw clenched. He said, "We leave it what it needs, a story here and there, keeps it small." I asked what it was. He looked out the window at the tree line that hemmed the town. "The woods aren't just trees," he said. "There's a hunger under them, always has been. It doesn't eat meat, it eats the shape of your life. It takes the last line of your story and wears it like a coat." It sounded like superstition. It also sounded like my father. He was the kind of man who could tell you the difference between a white oak and a red oak by bark alone, but he kept those cards in his kitchen like they were law. That night I dreamed the forest was a book and the trees were letters and some unseen hand was erasing paragraphs. When I woke, there were leaves under my bed.
I went to the stump before sunrise with my father's tape. It had a date on it from the week he vanished. The tape began with my father's voice, tired and calm, the way it sounded when he read me stories as a kid. He was telling one about a river that got tired of its own path and decided to flow backward. The wind died as he spoke. The trees leaned. The air thickened like syrup. I saw a seam open between two trunks, not a gap, not a path, but a depth, a darkness with shape to it, a cavity that didn't belong. It was not a creature, it was the absence of a creature, the outline of something pressed against the world from the other side. The leaves lifted from the ground and held there, suspended, as if caught on invisible strings. The forest didn't move around that seam, it moved toward it. I felt the hush dig into my bones. Then I heard my own voice echoing my father's words, though my mouth was shut. I dropped the player, the tape kept running, the seam in the woods widened by a hair, and the low sound rose, richer as if it had taken a breath. The waitress was right, the woods were making me a gift. It was my father's voice returned, it wanted mine in exchange. I ran back to the cabin and slammed the door and sat on the floor with my back against it, palms on my ears. The low sound seeped through the walls anyway, and my tongue went dry. I opened my father's logbook and read until I found the line that scared me most. If the woods learn your ending, they will walk it to you. I decided I wouldn't let it learn. I would give it a story with no end. I was an audio producer in the city, the kind who spent her days smoothing breath sounds and cutting silences. That skill felt like a weapon now. I looped my father's tape with the end clipped off, then recorded my own voice over it, telling the story of a girl who found a bicycle in a forest and never reached the last sentence. I stitched it into a seamless loop and fed it to the stump. The forest fell quiet, the leaves settled, the air let go of its hold. The sheriff found me sitting there at dawn with the player humming beside my knee. "You did what we do," he said softly. "No," I said, and my voice sounded thinner than it should have. "I did something else." I left Harlow Gap that morning and drove until the mountains softened into hills. I couldn't stay near the woods without hearing the loop, always just beneath my thoughts. I told myself I had bought the town time. I told myself I had silenced whatever lived under the trees. 2 weeks later, the loop was on the radio. It was part of an overnight broadcast, faint under the announcer's voice. A week after that, it was in a podcast credited to a found tape. The loop escaped into the world the way a song escapes from a bar. People shared it because it was eerie and beautiful, because the story never ended and they wanted to know if it ever would. Then I started seeing leaves where there shouldn't be any, on my office floor, in the elevator, inside my car. One night I woke to the sound of branches rubbing a window that looked to nothing but concrete. There were no trees outside. Still, the glass bowed inward as if pressed by a patient hand. I taped my mouth shut when I slept. It didn't matter. The loop had moved beyond me. Last week, a friend sent me a message. "Weird question, but do you hear a forest under that story you posted?" I didn't tell him the truth. I couldn't. The last time I tried, the lights flickered and my plant houses turned their leaves toward the sound. So I'm writing this now as a warning and a confession. If you can hear the faint rustle under my words, it isn't the wind. The woods found a new way out. It doesn't need a stump anymore. It only needs a story that never ends.